Warhammer 40,000 Renegades, Lord of Excess by Rich McCormick. Chapter 23. Edward met the blank-faced gaze of the copper-masked priestess. Firelight danced across the burnished metal, and two conical horns rose from her headdress. It gave her an otherworldly appearance, but the voice that came from behind the mask was unmistakably human. "We accept your offering," a lower-class voice said. Once he would have balked at taking orders from such a character, but now he would take whatever he could get. He'd learned the ways of the temple on his first visit, and had rapidly come to accept them, so much so that he stopped making his way back to the upper reaches of the city altogether, preferring instead to make his new home in the Spartan temple bunks that the priest offers. The irony made him laugh. A very different god, but he had once again made his way back to religion. He felt the knife pressed into his palm, handle first. Its curved blade was inexpertly crafted, imperfections clear in the metal, but it was sharp enough to cut skin. That was all that mattered. Shuffling men and women moved forward towards the cauldron at the centre of the room, each clutching their own blade. He joined them, falling into step and finding a space around the edge of the brass cauldron. He had given his riches once, given his worship to a false god who had offered him nothing. In comparison, this blessing was a small price to pay. A little pain, a little blood, and he was complete. For the night, at least. Edward drew the knife across his palm. A moment of sharp pain, then a dull ache as the blood came, swelling from deep within his body, to drip, drip, drip against the rough metal. Dozens of others joined him, and he smelled the coppery tang of their own sacrifice as their blood mixed with his in the deep well of the cauldron. "Why are we doing this? What do they need our blood for?" The voice belonged to a young woman, wide-eyed and rail-thin. She had been ushered alongside Edward at the edge of the cauldron. "I don't care," Edward said. "All I need to know is that they give me runoff, and I give them my blood. They could have my eyes if they gave me enough serum to make it worth my while." "Does everybody do this up here? What do you mean? This?" She gestured with the knife that had been placed into her hands. "Not everybody." "Is there anywhere else I can get it?" she asked. She was too loud. Copper-masked heads were turning in their direction. "There used to be. Not anymore. Please," she said. "Tell me. This doesn't feel right. Something feels weird about this place." "Shh," Edward said, trying to ignore this newcomer and focus on his own pain. "Just give your blood and don't cause a fuss." The woman hesitated, the knife held against her wrist in shaking hands. "I don't want to," she said, and dropped the knife into the cauldron. It clanged against the metal, sliding down the shallow interior edge until it came to rest, its blade submerged in the growing pool of blood. "This is strange. I don't feel right. I've got to go." She turned from the cauldron edge and tried to walk away. Rough hands caught her before she could make 2 paces. 4 copper-masked priestesses picked her up, 1 to each limb, and brought her back to the edge of the cauldron. Edward kept his eyes focused on his own wrist, on his own pain, as they placed the woman's neck against the brass lip of the cauldron. She was screaming now, promises and apologies that he knew she would not be able to keep. The 5th acolyte stepped forward and sliced her throat with the ritual blade. Her screams died as she did, her blood joining the melange of those that had given theirs willingly. It didn't matter, Edward knew. They cared not from whence the blood flowed. Quarantoon had been in communion with a new demonic entity when he was called to his master's chambers. As usual, he was instructed to bring a selection of his wares for Xantine's perusal. Cecily left the room, guided by 2 muscled figures, as the tattooed warrior laid out a selection of containers, amphorae, and other trinkets. Typically, she was escorted to her own bedchamber, a luxurious room on the same floor as Xantine's own grand chamber that she had come to realize used to be occupied by Phaedra. The crone had relocated to a smaller room in one of the lower levels, and rarely let Cecily forget the slight. But tonight the slaves stopped short of her room, waiting near the grand chamber's double doors for some signal. Sure enough, a moment later she heard her master's voice, plaintive, calling for her. "Cecily?" He turned on her heels and allowed the slaves to cast open the doors. Xantine sat in his throne, back rod straight, fingers gently caressing the fine marble. "Stay a while, won't you? I was hoping that we could discuss our deal." "Of course, my lord," she said. Xantine had avoided the conversation in recent weeks. She was keen to press the issue for her escape from Serene. Their ship was dead, and Xantine had yet been close-lipped about how he intended to keep up his half of the bargain. Cecily was halfway across the room, when Quarantoon took her by the wrist. His massive hand enveloped her forearm, its grip as cold and unyielding as steel. She let out a small shriek and looked up into his tattooed face, golden eyes fixed on her, eyeing her like a snake sizing up its prey to devour. After an uncomfortably long pause, he spoke. His voice was dry like sand. "Have you encountered a Neverborn, Psyker?" "Neverborn?" Cecily asked, a tremor in her voice. She tested his grip, but found it still vice-like in its strength. She considered screaming for help or trying to run, but she did not want to offend her master's brother. Plus, Xantine was there. He would not let any harm come to her. Quarantoon chuckled. "You will have encountered them, whether you were aware of it at the time or not." He released her wrist and turned to his collection of artifacts. "You may have called them demons once, or simply monsters, simplistic terms, but they are not incorrect. The Neverborn are reflections of our needs and wants, our fears and our desires." Toon traced gestures in the air, and runes on his armor began to glow with a golden light. "You are a prodigiously talented psyker, so I ask again, have you spoken to demons?" "I do not know," she answered truthfully. She had long seen things at the edges of her vision, felt the touch of hands she could not see on her mind. The voices, the whispers of the grass. Were these the voices of the Neverborn that Toon spoke of? "I'm quite sure that you have," Toon said. "Your kind are beacons to the Neverborn, offering doorways into this realm from their reality." He wheeled to face Cecily, and the speed of his movement caught her off guard. "It is a gift, your talent. They are beautiful things, and to be their conduit is a prize indeed, especially for a mortal." "I have heard voices," Cecily said. "The grass, it speaks to me. It helps me. Do demons help people?" Toon laughed. "Sometimes, if purposes align. Sometimes." He flashed a cold smile that did not spread to his eyes, as he produced a silver cylindrical object from his satchel. It was about as long as Cecily's forearms, and clearly ancient. "But they do have their uses," Toon said, and placed one end of the object to his lips. He blew, his cheeks expanding slightly, and smoke rose from the tip, an oily green-black smog that was heavier than the surrounding air. It fell slowly and stained the carpet of the chamber, and seemed to coalesce. Moving with uncanny purpose, it was, Cecily realized, forming into the shape of a human figure, with 2 arms and 2 legs, and a head whose featureless face swam, defying all attempts to focus on its shifting shape. Fully formed, it stood opposite her, a living shadow, swaying gently in the pungent air. "This creature is one of the most helpful in my collection," Toon said. "It is capable of identifying the most powerful psychers, the ones with the most pliant minds." The word-bearer spoke like a proud father as he took in the span of the creature. "For standard potentials, I would simply administer a physical test, but Xantine would not sanction a potentially wasteful use of his latest curiosity." The Lord of Serene looked down from his throne, a rigid smile still fixed on his face. He was strangely silent as the events unfolded, despite Cecily's obvious discomfort. Toon continued. "Though the services of this magnificent creature have been secured, please take a seat," he said, gesturing towards her chair at Xantine's side. "It will be better if you remain as still as possible while we conduct this test. Any unexpected movement could be quite painful for you." "Wait," Cecily said, backing away. The smoke figure copied her movements, stepping forward as she stepped back. "Xantine would not allow this." "I'm fulfilling Xantine's direct orders," Toon said. "Is that not right, my lord?" Xantine's voice was soft and sibilant. "Yes," he said from his throne, his eyes still hooded in darkness. "You see," Toon said. "What do you want from me?" Cecily asked. "I believe that you may hold the key to getting us off this inconsequential world. I want to test my supposition." Cecily stepped back again, and the smoke creature followed her. She thought she saw eyes in its swirling head, milky white and pitch black. Gripped by fear, she pushed outward with her mind, lashing out the only way she knew she could against such creatures. Instantly, she was pushed backwards, a mental force keeping her powers at bay. She knew the sensation. "Phaedra," she said. The witch hovered a few feet away, her skin prickling from the cold of the room. "Ah, yes," Toon said. "I had informed Lady Phaedra that this process may be quite painful." Quarantoon's wide grin showed teeth etched with spidery runes. She wanted to observe. I cannot say no to a curious mind. Cecily hit the chair as the smoke creature closed on her. She screamed for her master as its scent filled her nostrils, like burnt skin and electrical fire. And Xantine simply watched, his smile wide, and his eyes pale pink. "Arcat? Oh gods, Arcat, is that you?" The man was small and dirty, like so many that Arquette had seen in the streets of the Overcity's lowest reaches. His wide eyes looked out of place in his soot-darkened face, white against black. Arquette scanned his memory and found a boy, not much smaller than the man he had become. Edward? I thought you were dead. Edward took the much larger man by his good arm and ushered him to the side of the street. Faces that had turned to regard them turned back to their business, gambling with silver cubes, attending to steaming pipes of narcotic substances, or staring hungrily through smeared windows at the semi-clothed figures that cavorted within. Have you been keeping well? How did you get here? Where have you been? Arquette blinked. It was more conversation than he'd had in a long time, and he didn't know where to begin. Below, he said hesitantly. The Undercity? Edward asked, incredulous. And you made it out? But gods, man, look at you. What happened to your arm? Edward touched the stump lightly, and Arquette recoiled as his finger brushed the skin. Long, Arquette growled, remembering the pain and remembering the angel that stole his limb. Long time ago, he mumbled. Edward gave him a long stare. Pity, perhaps. You must be starving. Come with me. I know a place you can recover. Sister. A million voices sang as one, impossibly beautiful and impossibly sad, a chorus of loss. Sister, return to us. Sir John could hear it now that she was stronger. Her sisters and brothers, across time, distance and reality, joining themselves in a perfect harmony of desperate longing. She wanted so desperately to join them, to return to her prince's palace, to walk its fractal halls, to serve once more by his side, but she could not. Not yet. Her vessel was clever, that was why she had selected him, and fickle too. Long years together had allowed her to regain a fraction of the power she had once possessed, but it had also taught him how to guard his soul and how to protect his body. She could use him when his guard slipped, or in the rare occasions where he allowed it, but she could not yet dominate his flesh form as many of her kin could. I am too weak, she sighed. Then take strength. It was so simple for them, these beings. She had been so much more than them once, mighty and awe-inspiring. She had become legend amongst the flesh races of the mundane reality. They feared her and worshipped her in equal measure. And the mere whisper of her existence had inspired the death of worlds. Billions went to their doom gladly with her name on their lips, her touch on their skin, giving themselves over to sensation, to excess, until they laid her low. It was not easy engineering her downfall, and even for a race as long-lived as the Eldari, it took them generations to put their plan into action. Their seers plotted, putting wheels in motion that they knew their children's children would not see come to fruition. But through twists of fate and the machinations of some of her own kind, they achieved their goal. She was permanently stripped of her demon form, and her consciousness split and bound to objects buried deep below the sands of a world that came to be known as Calliope. Now she was a fraction of herself, and the vessel she had chosen used his time playing games of power. She coursed with anger, her pride wounded. As the song of her siblings assailed her, she would join them, but not in Xantine's shell. There was another way. The young space marine, the double of his gene father. She had watched him rise, growing and coalescing in power, like a dust cloud forming a star. Now there was ambition and pride coursing through his veins like blood. Strength, too, plenty of that. He had been galvanized by pain, shaped and tempered like a sharpened blade to become the tool she needed. A vessel, waiting for her to claim it. A being of pain and pleasure, of pleasure and pain. She watched the swelling soul and called to it. He would be hers, and she would be his. Come to me. The words woke him from slumber. But he was not in darkness. The reality he returned to was one of blinding light, so pure in its brightness that he could see nothing else. His senses returned slowly, like a cogitator running through its startup subroutines, and the blinding light became blinding pain. His nerves screamed with agony, burned almost to the point of destruction, almost to the point of death. The agony would have doomed a lesser creature, too fundamental, too absolute for them to comprehend. But he had been made to withstand pain, his hardened skin, his enhanced organs, his toughened skeleton, and so he endured it. He let it crash against the form of his body and recede. Like ocean waves against the shoreline, why fight it? Pain was not the enemy, not to be fought and pushed away. It was but one of the panoply of sensations. Pleasure by another name. Here, now, he was testing the limits of sensation, to heights of experience that no living being had enjoyed. And so he embraced the pain. He fell upon it like a banquet, devouring it, savouring its hotness, its sweetness. He enjoyed its bouquet, and let its myriad flavours rest on his tongue, then swallowed it, and let it nourish his ravaged body. Come to me. Melodious and sweet, the voice was a salve to his scarred soul. The pain was blissful, but the voice promised something more. He could have what he desired, all of it, and more, if he would simply do as it asked. For the first time in his immortal life, he had clarity of purpose. He rose from the light, skin scorched and blood boiling, and began his ascent to the dark. Wind lifted the sand, a few grains at first, but soon the dust became a gale, and swelling blackness filled his visor. When it settled, the darkness remained. Not total darkness. Light, just a pinprick, was visible above him. Sound filtered through the opening, muffled and distant. He hung, the consciousness adrift once more in his own body. A finger hold. It was all he had, but it was all he needed. The demon was occupied, her attention was elsewhere, and he would take his body back. Well, it looks like we've set up a final conflict. I'm assuming that that was Toricon. I also can't believe... Actually, I can believe it. It's the same thing that they spoke about earlier. They all resent Xantine. Phaedra resents Xantine for no longer being his favourite. But, like, what did she expect? She literally does nothing. I mean, she's very useful, but, like, meh? Meh? She should know that he wants the hot new thing. Lol. And that's exactly what Cecily is. But yeah, I enjoyed that. See, I hope Cecily's going to be okay. It's, not going to be easy. And also, I imagine that Xantine is going to wake up in the middle of that scene where they left Cecily. Which is probably going to be terrifying for everyone involved. I'm curious to see what they're going to do. It's set up a lot of really nice conflicts, and I can't wait to see them unfold in the coming chapters. Yeah.